2 of the Allosaurus sculpture, where I'll be painting the work I created in a past lesson with acrylic paint. You can find that lesson along with lots of others at our webpage at www.montmart.net. We also have our Facebook and the Creative Connection, that's our art club, attached to the page also. And we'd love to meet you. So let's paint an Allosaurus. And the first step is to cover the surface with a base coat. I'm using black gesso, applied with a large soft brush from a Gallery Series brush set. I'm also using a deep well plastic palette and a paper towel to limit the amount of paint on my brush. We need to create an even yet thin coat of gesso, and dabbing of the paint onto the paper ensures the coat will be thin. I will mention too that gesso provides a much more stable and resilient base than what just paint would. Gesso has additives to make it a lot more flexible with greater adhesion qualities as well. As I said, this base coat must be thin. If it is applied thickly, it can well in the hollows and all your hard work and detail can be lost. So take your time and feather it on. Use the large brush as much as you can and switch to the small brush for the detail parts. We can then move on to the belly. Here's a tip: if you look at a tube of Montmart paint, you will see these markings. 3 stars mean it is fully light fast, and a closed circle means it is fully opaque. Full opaque colours are better for coverage. So lay on the colour, in this case cream, in the dimension acrylic. I'm using a round brush and I'm softening the edges into the body colour with water. Then lay more cream into the centre to strengthen the tone. Next, squeeze out some burnt umber and dry brush this over the surface. Again, ensure your brush is not charged with too much paint. You just want the paint to come into contact with the high parts of the surface. So use that paper towel again so the paint is sparingly applied. I find it helps if the brush is lightly held too for some reason. It's better to slowly build up the colour and stop when you're happy. If too much paint is applied, you have to start over. It's amazing how effective dry brushing is at highlighting any detail. Your sculpting skills also become very apparent with this stage, too, as everything comes to light. Once you're happy, let this dry. The next dry brushing touch is some more of that cream. Follow the same technique of paint application, but remember, this cream is a very strong tone and your brush must be extra dry. The sculpture really comes alive with this step and any detail really shows itself. Keep the brush moving quickly and ensure you don't stop the brush in the middle of a stroke. And make sure no paint makes its way into the hollows. You want them to remain in deep shadow, or the suggestion of depth will be lost. So up until now it's all been dry brushing, and if you're painting a dinosaur, you can leave it like this or you can keep going. I'm going to add some colourings and markings onto my dinosaur. So let's get that on. In many ways the artist has full creative license with their colour choices, because obviously no one knows what colour dinosaurs were. But I think if one looks at the birds and reptiles of today, a fairly plausible colour scheme can be suggested. I think they probably would have evolved some sort of camouflage markings, as well as some bright colourings for maybe mating and so they could identify each other. I apply these markings with a fine brush and use that cream again. This is just the base coat and I will be glazing over this tone with a very translucent mix of yellowy ochre. I could just mix the colour direct and apply it, but the colour doesn't look as convincing, as it's too stark and one-dimensional or something. Try to keep the stripes a similar distance from each other, but don't create the markings too uniform, otherwise it just looks too contrived. At this stage, I paint in the stripes rising from the belly. Now let's move on to our friend's face. Use the finest brush for this and spot the colour on. Again, ensure the patterning is not too uniform and let some of the base colour show through. I find it helps not to think too much about placement. Soften the tone on the edges because when we glaze on our top coat, it will create a subtle variation. Once you have created the markings on both sides of the face, place some markings on the bottom jaw. As well as the patterning, I add little dots to create more interest. Well, the markings are all in, so the next step is to glaze those markings. So let's get the glaze on. For this step, I use yellow orange and yellow ochre in the Silver Series range. I thin these with water so they are the viscosity of milk and lay it onto the markings I have created with the cream. You want this colour to be very translucent with just a hint of colour. Of course, at this stage you could glaze on any colour you wanted. I think a blue, green or purple even would look awesome. I got the idea for my friend's colour scheme from a photo I saw of a goanna. But if you wanted to create a more provocative scheme, you could draw inspiration from the skin of a chameleon maybe. Next I add the yellow-orange onto this face region. Keep this colour thin also. Adding such a strong colour really changes the model, and like in a lot of cases, a little splash of vibrant colour makes more of an impression than if I was to cover the whole thing. As I've said before, sometimes it's not what you put in, it's what you leave out. Once I'm happy with the face, I paint in the eye with yellow and create a highlight dot of white also. Next I give those beautiful horns a quick dry brush to bring out the detail as much as possible. At this stage, while I have the white, I pick out any elements I want to highlight, areas like those back scoots and nostrils and the like. I then paint in the teeth with cream. Ensure you paint in the edges as well. The last stage is to paint in the sand on the base. So I mix up some burnt umber with a touch of cream and add water so my paint is the viscosity of cream. I then dab the colour on with the end of the brush. Create variation by laying in darker tones and mix them directly on the base. And voila! Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned and remember to keep on creating.